We are recording.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen.
Welcome, Patty. So we will let you bring us up to speed and take us into the next half of your presentation.
Okay, Stace, just so you're aware, in the mode that I'm sharing in, I'm not able to see if anything pops up in the chat box. So please interrupt me if someone has a question or you need to stop me for any other reason. For some reason, I can't see the chat box now that I'm sharing. So that would be helpful. I'm not sure how many of you were here for part one back in, oh my goodness, was it May? It seems like it was like months and months ago to me, but we at that time talked about how to start, how to begin when you have a little that's coming in for auditory therapy. And we talked about ways to sample auditory skills, to figure out where to start. So where you want to start with your lessons and how to know at what level on a curriculum. And we talked about different curriculums that are available for auditory skill development to use as a guide. And there are many, and we talked about how they're all about the same. They may list it in different ways, but it's all the same normal developmental sequence of skills. And so towards the end of it, we had a sample child, and his name was Brady. And he was 2.5, and he had just gotten cochlear implants, and he had about 6 months of experience. And we were going to go into lesson planning for him. So that's where we are now, is he's been working with you. You had your skills that you identified, and he's been working with you for 6 months. And so we're going to be talking about what you put into a lesson plan for him. So as we go along, if you could type in the chat box any questions that you have, that would be helpful. I believe that we have from 9 till 10 to go over the presentation, and then maybe 10 to 11 for questions. Is that correct, Stacy? Before I get going and time myself here?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So you have a little leeway. Our interpreters stay. So if you go a few minutes longer, don't finish your thoughts.
Panic. Okay.
So that's why it's kind of all built in together.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so we're starting with thinking about materials. I know that there were some folks that talked about, like, well, what kind of materials do I start with, and what do I need to buy? And I think a lot of folks, when they're getting started, think that they need to build this huge toolbox of lots and lots of things. And we gave suggestions last time, or I gave suggestions on the types of things that you would want to buy that have many uses. So you never want to buy something that only has one use and then you're done and now you've got to buy new material. So lots of different uses. And I like to think back on when I first started doing auditory therapy, on my old guides that I would read books on and watch videos on. And Warren Estabrooks was one of them, and Doreen Pollack, I'm that old, would have watched these things. And they would always say, the two of them would say, you should be able to use whatever materials you have on hand in your house, in the child's house. You could pull anything and turn it into an auditory activity. And they'd use the example of a roll of lifesavers. So you should be able to grab a roll of lifesavers out of your pocket and make some sort of a task that can work on any of the levels of auditory skills. And I like to think about that, like, how would I work on detection or sound awareness with a roll of lifesavers? Well, I can think of a bunch of ways. And it's no different really than your ring on a stick. Why couldn't you use lifesavers for that? You could use it for discrimination. You could have two colors representing two different sounds and have them discriminate between this sound or that sound, or you could have them discriminating the color words. Identification or association, you could attach words to each of those, or you could use it to work on the theme of colors, and they could identify colors. You could do comprehension or processing or auditory memory games with them. Which came first, which came next, or auditory patterning, and which color would come next if I did red, orange, yellow, red, orange, and then wait. There's all sorts of activities that you can pull out of your hat with very limited notice, using the materials that are in the child's house, if you have a good understanding of how the auditory hierarchy works and how the skills progress and get more complex. So you shouldn't have to buy a lot of toys that are advertised as auditory training toys if you have an idea of the auditory hierarchy. You should be able to use the materials that you have on hand. It helps to have some materials, and it helps to have some toys and things available, but don't feel like you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on something that you saw advertised on this auditory verbal network, because you can use what the family has too and gradually build your materials. Let's talk about Brady for a little bit. So like I said at the beginning, so we're going to pretend that Brady's now 3. He's had his cochlear implants for a year, and he has pretty good implant thresholds. He's between 20 and 25. And here's where he is on some of the different skills. So he's learned now that objects have names. And he's starting to use his language for a lot of purposes, some communication intents, and I've listed those there. So to greet and to label things, and he uses onomatopoeia with his toys. That's great. He's producing some of the speech sounds spontaneously or imitation, either in isolation or in words. And he is, those are the sounds that we would expect him to be producing. Those are the earliest developing sounds. And he's using language to get his needs met, which is better than before. He was crying and tantruming and pointing before, and now he's starting to vocalize or use words or approximations. He's greeting people. He knows the names of his family members, and he's got a few nouns and a few adjectives that are age appropriate. And when we're looking at his auditory skills, he's able to discriminate words that are very different in consonants and vowels. And if we're looking on one of the auditory skill hierarchies that we had talked about before, the Terrace one, the Ausplan, AUSPLAN. One, I would say he's at level 3, which is the words that have dissimilar consonants and vowels, but on any auditory hierarchy, it might be called something different, but they will have that level. So that's where he is. And so let's take a look at the different levels that are on that hierarchy. So we're looking at the identification of segmentals, which is speech sounds. Would you be able to figure out, if you just met this child, based on what we talked about last time, where he is without a formal test? Do you have things in your head that you could do quickly with him just to reassure yourself that you're working at the right level? How would you look at each of those things? And hopefully, based on some of the things we talked about last time, you would have some ideas. Like, he's beyond speech sound difference and isolation levels, certainly, if he is able to tell the difference of his family members, right? He's able to hear the family member name and associate with a person. So we know he's already past that, but we could sample which sounds he could tell the difference of. We just know he's past that level. I know he is. And I've just given you that he has some words that he's using contextually correctly. So we know that he's at least at the 3.2, the vowel and consonant difference in same length words. Is he doing some of the minimal pairs? I don't know. We could test to find out that he knows some words that are different only by vowels. So like kit, cat, cut. How about ones that he might know only by consonant differences? So like bat, mat, fat, pat. We could check for some of those to see where he is. How about, is he doing this only at the word level, or is he doing it within a phrase or a sentence, like with a carrier phrase? We could do some quick checks on that. And then we'd know where to start if we want to do that. We don't need a formal test in order to keep moving up the hierarchy, is my point. And you may also find that he may not be 100% at one level, but he's starting to get some of the skills at the next level. Well, by all means, you want to introduce that next level too. So keep working at a level that he hasn't mastered yet, but start introducing some of those harder contrasts, some of those minimal pairs simultaneously, so that he's starting to get a harder and harder, and you're always kind of diagnostically doing your therapy to check to see when can I push him a little bit more and when do I need to back off. So let's say that we looked at it, and these are the scores that I have for him. So he has pretty much mastered speech sound difference in isolation. And as I suspected, he is pretty high up on his differentiation of words in isolation that are very different in vowels and consonants. And he's making a nice headway on some minimal pairs. He's also getting some of those same skills when I put the word into a sentence or in context. So that's great. He's not mastered it yet. So I know about where I'm going to start working. I'm going to be at the areas that are highlighted, and I'm going to also add in some of the harder skills, probably do some minimal pairs and some ones that are more auditorily different, and start putting them in some phrases in my activity. So now I have an idea where he is. Now I know where he is. What do I include in therapy session? Some of you have more experience than others. So if you think of something that you would like to add to the session that I've created, please give me ideas. I love hearing new ways of doing things. So I'm going to start with the foundation. I like to include with my littles, I like to include bottom-up skills, a combination of bottom-up skills and top-down skills. And for those of you that have not heard that term before, bottom-up skills, think of them more like the building blocks of language. So they're more like what you might have heard called drills or contrasts that the child has to get before they can put it into context. So these might be things like checking ling sounds. It might be working on some minimal pairs and some super segmental contrasts, like in a drill kind of format. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I like to do a limited amount of the bottom up skills because it's not putting it into a language context, but that doesn't mean it's not important. So some of the literature that I like to read from Amy Robbins, she called those skills quick, fun, get it done, meaning intensively work on them and then move right along to language, putting it into a context, or while you're working on your language activity, you find that you need to go back down and work on some of those bottom-up skills, go back down and work on them until they can hear the difference between the sounds or the super segmental contrast, and maybe can produce or imitate them, then put it right back into something more meaningful. There's a time and a place for it. And it would be the need for bottom-up skill building. It would be as if one of her examples she gave that I love is like saying to a child, okay, today we're going to go play tennis. We're going to go onto a court, we're going to play tennis. Here you go, here's your racket, let's start playing the game. But you haven't yet shown them how to hold the racket or hit the ball or do a serve or talked about the rules. So of course we need to build the skills and learn the rules before we put something into language. But we don't want to spend all the time talking about how to hit a ball and not put it into a game, because that's just not fun and it's not very meaningful. So build the bottom-up skills and move on to something that has more meaning and is more language focused. So for Brady, what would we do? We might want to spend some time on these drills. We might want to quickly check his ling sounds. I've already said that he could identify all of them, so he should be able to identify all of them today. He's even able to imitate them as his way of showing he identifies them, except for S. I'm not worried about that because he could identify it by pointing to it. And it's not a developmentally appropriate sound for him to be producing, so I'm okay about that. And then I might work on some minimal pairs at the sound level or word level that are appropriate, so age appropriate sounds. And I might have him working on those sounds. Maybe in the last session, I could tell that he was putting some of those sounds into only some of the positions in the word. So maybe today I'm going to experiment and see quickly if he can put it in initial, medial, and final parts of the word by using some nonsense syllables in a game. Maybe I'm going to use some words where I'm using minimal pairs. Maybe I'm going to work on some super segmental contrast that I'll be using in my activity. So I might choose words that I'm going to use in my actual activity. I might use super segmental things. I'm using my actual activity just to be sure that he's had some extra practice hearing it and putting it into his auditory memory before I use it in a game. Or I might be in the middle of my game and have to go back to this because it's clear that he can't hear the difference. But my tip to you when you're working on bottom-up skills is to make sure that you have a finite number in mind that you want to achieve. How many times will they have to do this drill before you move on? Littles tend to lose interest in this kind of activity quickly unless they know when it will end. So if you're going to plan 10 minutes on this, you want to have 10 minutes worth of toys. For example, Brady being a little boy, I might have a 25 cars that go down a racetrack when he's done doing my drills. I hand him the car, I say the sounds, he produces the sounds, zip it down the track into a bucket. When he's done with his 25 cars, he is done with the bottom-up skill portion of this exercise, just so that he knows, and then we move on. So it gives you a way to know when to stop and him, and then you're moving on to another activity. So that's just a tip that I have found useful. And bottom-up skills, sometimes we think, well, it's an older child. Like for some of our, I know we're not talking about older kids today, but I do want to point out that for some of our older kids, it's a lot easier to think about the language context that we're using for them. We might be using like if we're working in a school, we might be using something from their curriculum. But there's also a time for working on some bottom-up skills. So for example, if their speech therapist is still working on some artic things with them, you could use some auditory skill building. So working on hearing the errored sound versus the correct sound. Can they hear the difference? Can they make the difference? So using some self-monitoring built into your lesson, or say they're having difficulty with some spelling and they're consistently missing certain sounds in words, you might take that information you get from the teacher and build that into a lesson so they can listen to what they're missing and work that into some of your lessons. And always, if you're feeling that some of the things that are happening within your session are because they are now not able to do an auditory skill that they previously were able to, we previously established they could do it, that's a concern. So stop where you are and spot check it. Maybe something happened to their amplification. Maybe something simple that you can fix right then and there so that the rest of your session is meaningful and they can hear well. But maybe if you track that over a few sessions and a skill is no longer there, it could be a change in hearing. And that would be important to notify their audiologist about. So bottom-up skills never go away, but they probably become a little bit less of each session as the kid gets older, unless specific things come up, I would say. I did want to mention that. And I'm not able to move for some reason. There we go. Okay. The bulk of what we want to include or think about when we're building an auditory rehab session is our top-down skills. So we want to be working on functional listening and communication skills. And so we want to be looking at cognitively, what kinds of concepts are they supposed to be doing at this age? Language, what's typical language and vocabulary that we can build? And auditory skills that we can focus on during the activity. What should they be doing sequentially? I think when I first started doing therapy, the thing that was always at the forefront of my mind, it just felt so overwhelming to think about how much vocabulary and how much language there is to learn, and how could I possibly teach every word that this kid needs to know. And the child is not, I knew that they weren't learning incidentally like their peers because of their hearing limitations. So how can I make this as to put it like a metaphor, like calorie dense, like a Cliff Bar into my session so that they're getting the most out of the session. So you want to make sure you're packing in a meaningful way some cognitive, some language, some auditory, some speech into one lesson rather than the old-fashioned way of doing. Now it's auditory training time. Now it's language building time. Now it's speech time. You want to make it all in one, wrap it up all in one so we can make it as dense as possible, pack in as many things as possible to learn within one activity. And that way you're building a lot of skills all at the same time. Over time, when we talk about speech, did we talk about speech here? So of speech, you want to expect the child is going to be exposed to all the different speech sounds. So it's not that we don't want to expose them to sounds that are outside of their age expected range, right? I mean, they should hear words, even if we don't expect them to be able to say S. We don't stop exposing them to words that have S in them. But we do start to expect them to produce and imitate certain sounds in a normal developmental sequence. So we're going to be, our focus for speech sounds, when we're thinking about speech sounds in planning our lesson, even though we're not speech therapists, we want to create opportunities, many opportunities, to kind of bombard them to hear those sounds and use those sounds and practice those sounds that are at their expected developmental level, so that they can get a clear auditory memory of what it's supposed to sound like and how to produce it. So we're going to take a look at some of the earlier developing speech sounds and maybe some of the super segmental skills like pitch and duration and some of the learning to listen sounds to help build that auditory memory and that self-monitoring practice. You can also collaborate with the speech pathologist on your team. So hopefully the speech pathologist is working on some art tech. Well, find out what they're working on and build some of those sounds into your lessons so they get multiple ways, chances and opportunities to hear the sound being used and to practice using that sound and to create auditory memory of what that should sound like. I have found, some of you probably already have seen these, but I have found these great, they're old, but these great guides that if you work with me, I've probably already shared them with you, that I used when I was doing a lot of private practice therapy. So I'm going to show you these links. So Cochlear Corporation developed these great little booklets. Now, I don't know how I can cursor down here. Hold on. Trying to cursor down. Oh, here we go. That separate out all of the sounds of speech into groups. And so when you look at their book, I'm going to get to a sound. So let's do P, for example. They're going to give you a list of speech sounds that have that letter in the initial, medial, and final position. They're going to give you all kinds of phrases and activities that really kind of bombard the child with that sound, some routines, some games and toys, some books, songs that you can use to kind of focus on those sounds. And I loved using those. I might think like for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to auditorily bombard this child on the sound P. And I'm going to find all of these activities. And so while you're bombarding them on P, you're also building their language and their cognitive skills in all of those areas. You're just happening to focus on that P sound for a couple weeks because that's one of the earlier developing sounds. So I might be working from this book on that. And let me go back to, and then the vowel one is very similar, but they start out on the vowel one with ways to use them for some of the super segmentals like duration and intensity and pitch, and then they go into each vowel sound. So they're going to do the same thing. They give you some words and some activities and phrases and books that have that sound being used many, many, many times. So it's a way for you to take that sound and do a lot of auditory work that with them in a very functional, fun way. Lots of preschool-like activities are listed. So I think those are great resources that you can use to help build a lesson. In fact, they give you a lot of things that you could build right into your lesson and extend your lesson into another one or another one for a couple weeks. Those are just some ideas. Also, when you're thinking of speech sound development, it's good to review what to expect at different ages. So do we want to be working on the TH sound when the child is 2? No. Or that sound when the child is 2. No, it's not that we don't expose them to that sound, and it's not that we avoid using words with that sound, but we don't really want to have that as the focus of our practice and and our expectations for productions and imitations and auditory work when it's not expected for them for a child with normal hearing. So certainly not for a child that is hard of hearing. Advanced Bionics has another nice guide. In the last talk, we looked at some formants for the ling sounds, if you remember that. And I said at that time, remembering that you can always, when you're looking at pairing sounds, when you think about it, a child only needs that first formant in order to be able to detect the sound. But in order for them to be able to discriminate one sound from another, especially if they share the same first formant, you're going to need to be able to have that next formant. So whether it's listed in this chart format 2, 3, or 4, you have to have that second formant in order to be able to tell two similar sounds from each other. And so thinking about their audiogram and thinking about their implant thresholds for the different consonant sounds and vowels, it's very important for you to understand when they're making errors, why those errors might be made. And then for the hierarchy of language and cognitive skills, that also happens in a very predictable, sequential order for normal hearing kids. So therefore it will for hard of hearing kids too. And at first I'm more concerned about getting things presented in the correct order. We already know they're delayed. We're hoping that we can catch up at some point to the normal developmental skill level and age, but we always want to present it in a normal sequential order. So I would review some developmental checklists to help assist me in planning what kinds of language concepts, what kind of cognitive concepts that I can use, and go back to your like cottage acquisition scales and look at their checklists, look at the integrated scales of development and your MacArthur Bates and your Rossetti. Just take a look at some of the concepts and the order that they develop in, and think of how you could use that checklist to develop the foundation of a lesson plan. This last link I tried the past couple of days was supposed to be for the integrated scales of development from Cochlear, and for some reason they've unlinked those things. But if you type in like a search bar, integrated scales of development, that one will pop up. So I can't show that to you right now because I don't know how to do that while I'm sharing the screen. But basically it does give you a very similar, but in a kind of a toned down version of what the cottage acquisition skills would have. They have for each age level, what to expect for speech, language, auditory, cognition. And if you go through even that one, which is for free online, you can see some ideas for cognitive concepts and language concepts that should be developed at certain age levels, and use that as some foundational skills for the basis of your lesson. So let's take a look at Brady. We know which speech sounds he has in isolation. We've talked about those. He has them in all of the normally developing or the earlier developing sounds. He's able to do them in isolation and in some words. That's great. So now we know what we're working with. Cognitive concepts, I'm going to be thinking about what is age appropriate. Some language and vocabulary that might be age appropriate. He's still pretty far behind his normal hearing peers. And we know where his auditory skills were. We know that he's able to hear, differentiate words that are very different, and he's starting to learn some minimal pairs, and he's also starting to do that within phrases. So here we go, we're ready. The therapy lesson that I'm thinking of for him right now is something very fun, and it's with materials that I had on hand because I save everything. But I have my kids' farm, so they're Fisher-Price Farm, and I have a book of Old MacDonald, and the family might have it if you don't. So you don't have to rush out and buy a Fisher-Price Farm if you don't have one. The family might have one, and they're probably more than happy to let you use it, or you might have one at school. If you're working in a school, you might be able to borrow it from a preschool classroom or a teacher. So the main idea of this is that I'm going to be using all of those areas, and I'm going to break them down in just a minute, and put them into a fun activity that's an activity a 3-year-old would like, and is one that most 3-year-olds have learned the song and read the book and played with farm animals. And I'm going to have him learning these skills while playing with the toys and singing the song. And he's also going to have a chance to be the teacher and see if I remember some of the names of the animals and the sounds they make while we play the song. So this turn taking is also a piece of the therapy lesson too. So I usually like to write when I'm thinking of an activity. I'd like to make a sheet, and sometimes I make my data sheet out of it. I try to keep data on at least one or two of those things during the lesson, so that, and maybe the next time I'll keep data on another two things, because you can't keep data on everything. But I like to write out what my goals are to make sure I'm addressing cognitive, language, speech, and auditory. And I'm going to go through each of these in a separate slide. So this would be my lesson plan, how I'd write it out. And so when we look at cognitive, I'm going to be talking about what is a farm and what is a farmer, and that animals say different sounds. This is the name of the animal, and he says this. We're looking at a picture of the child's home and a farm and say, you live in a house. These animals live in a barn or on a farm. Where do animals live on the farm? Within the barn. You have a mommy and daddy that take care of you. A farmer takes care of his animals. That is his work. So those are the cognitive concepts that we will be including. Language and speech, I have specifically chosen this lesson so that Brady has multiple opportunities to hear and say words with many of the earlier developing sounds, like, and the names of the animals and the sounds they make. I'm going to try to really acoustically highlight those earlier developing P, B, M, W, N, and H sounds so that he can really hear them. So by highlighting, I might draw them out or make them a little louder or just repeat them so that he really has a good chance to hear them. So that's called auditory bombardment and acoustic highlighting. So I'm giving him multiple opportunities to both hear and produce. We're going to be doing some vowel play with some of the vowels. Obviously, when we're singing E-I-E-I-O, he's going to be able to practice making those vowel contrasts. And we're just going to emphasize or highlight the early developing sounds. So I have some photos of some other toys that you could bring into your activity just to make it fun. On a different lesson day. There's so many things on that topic that I'm sure you can give me some ideas. Auditory goals, we're going to be working on discriminating or identifying onomatopoeia for the various animals, producing some super segmentals. So while you're singing a song, it gives you an excellent way to practice pitch variation, duration, prosody, and rhythm. So I'm not going to quiz him on that. I'm just going to try to get him to sing along with me, and he will get natural practice in those aspects. And discrimination of words that have the same syllables but different consonants. So again, he's going to be producing those throughout the activity and imitating, and I'll be able to keep some data on if he's able to get them. And which ones are easier for him, acoustically highlighting the targeted sound. And then at the end, after we've sung the song and played with the animals a little bit, I'm going to go back down and maybe break it down to our bottom-up skills, where I pull out 3 or 4 of the animals and set them out and cover them up. And then I'll sing a verse. Old MacDonald had a farm. On the farm he had and I might use either the onomatopoeia or the name of the animal and uncover and see if he can pick it. And if he picks it, yay. Now it's his turn. But if he's not correct, I have to be thinking about what I'm going to do about that. Maybe he didn't hear it right, so I might give him another chance. Maybe I need to reduce my set size. Maybe instead of 4 animals, I bring it down to 2, and we review what those 2 say and put it back down, cover it up, and sing it again, and let him be very successful for a few before I build up my set size again. But however he does, I'm going to be making it more complex or less complex and see how he does. And then he gets a turn to be the teacher. So he gets to sing the verse and I have to listen. This gives him some practice in production and producing those contrasts. And kids love to be the teacher. And they especially love if you are wrong, of course. So if you are wrong and you pick the right one and they can correct you, all the better, because, well, it gives them more opportunities to produce the word again and again and again until you get it right. So I like to do that, and kids love when I'm wrong. Lesson extenders. So sometimes you feel like you've put so much effort into this one activity that you're like, oh, I wish I could use this activity. I can't even bear the thought of like making something this big and dramatic again, with a whole different thing. Well, why wouldn't you just stick with Old MacDonald for a little while? There's lots of ways to extend that activity for another few sessions, even another couple weeks, if you can think about it. So you might have another book that's about a farm. You could use different props and toys. You could make an experience book together. Maybe if you're working privately, you could make it with a parent. You could make it with, maybe they went to the farm for Halloween to pick out their pumpkin, and you can make an experience book with the farm animals. You could check out different books from the library. I've used songs that are related to Old MacDonald. I'm not that clever because some of them already exist, mind you, but like Old MacDonald had a zoo, or Old MacDonald had a food, or Old MacDonald drove a truck and things fall off the truck. Ways to like sneakily get in more words that are not farm animals, but that also contain those developmentally appropriate sounds. So different items could fall off the truck. The next lesson, and there is a book that actually has that. So Old MacDonald had a zoo, so you can introduce more animals, and then maybe the cognitive concept could be animal homes, zoo animal versus farm animal. You could do some pretend play, like acting out the story of being a farmer. There's so many other ideas. If anyone has anything they've done, like type that into the chat box. I would love to hear other ways that you've extended it for a little. But just know that it's okay to use that same theme for multiple lessons, and keep working on it, because that repetition builds language and builds confidence for that kid. So extend your lesson, and if you're working privately with a family, give them homework based on what you did today. Give them things to do, and when you come back the next week, check in with them. How did he do? How did he do on this or this or this or whatever? It's a nice way to get some cooperation at home and to build those skills, because you might be there for 1 or 2 times a week, but they're there every day. So it's nice to have families do some homework with their kid. How do I make the skill more or less complex? So we've already talked about this. If they can't pick the animal out of my set of 4, let's reduce the set until they build some confidence. What if when we're producing, the child cannot make even a close approximation to the sound? Now here's where you go back down to the bottom up skills. Maybe you're going to break down that word and give him some visuals, or give him some tactile clues, or maybe some other ways that you can think of to help him reproduce at least one aspect of the word. So maybe he can get at least the syllable number, or maybe he can get at least the first sound in the word. Using some visual cues, and then if there's any part of it that he's able to change to be more similar to your production, we're going to applaud that and add more chances to hear and see what you're producing. So that's how I would make it a little bit less complex. What if you get to this activity and you have completely misjudged, like, wow, they're getting every single thing correct. This was way too easy. I blew it. No way. There's ways to make that activity more complex, always. You can make it more auditorily complex by asking for 2 animals at a time. Maybe remove all visuals. So now he has to do, there's an open set, and he's got to pick what animal says it. Maybe give him an animal that you didn't use in your game and see if he's like, what? We didn't talk about that animal. Or give him an animal that wouldn't be expected to be on the farm, an elephant, and see if he's like, if he notices that. There's always ways to make it more complex. So don't ever worry like they're getting everything right, he's not learning something. 1, you're giving him opportunities to build language in the other areas, but 2, you can make it more complex by just making the auditory skill that you're working on a little bit more complex. The auditory sandwich is one way. If those of you that don't know the term, it is kind of funny when you think about like what it looks like, a little sandwich, but you're always wanting to make sure that they hear it auditorily, giving them a chance to do it without those additional cues. And then if if you need to go back up and, like we said, do the bottom-up skills, give a little building blocks, give them auditory, visual, tactile, lip reading, highlighting a key word, or giving them a clue. After you've done that and they have it right, put it back into auditory again. So the last thing they remember is the auditory memory of what it sounded like. That's what an auditory sandwich is. And that is just one example of changing the difficulty level. You had it difficult, you made it easier, now you make it more difficult again. That's your sandwich. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the first lesson? Because Brady is just like making leaps and bounds of gains. So we're going to move on to a second example.
And Patty, this is Heidi. I don't see any questions in the chat, so we're good to move on.
Perfect. Okay, so you've been working with Brady now for 6 more months, and now he has 18 months of auditory experience, and he's making tons of gains of vocabulary because you're an awesome therapist, and he's starting to use language and cognitive concepts, and he's catching on to building those earlier developing sounds in most word positions, single words. He's even starting to put a couple words together. Hooray! So he's using 1 to 2 word phrases, and he's starting to identify more and more of the words that differ in vowels and consonants, and even he's built up some of those minimal pairs. And he's using more communication intents for language for more purposes because he has that vocabulary, and that's really exciting to watch that grow. So as you're taking data, remind yourself every now and then, like, wow, we have a lot to go, but we're making these huge changes, and it's meaningful in his life because he's able to use language in so many different ways that he wasn't able to before. So for my next lesson, I'm going to stay in his appropriate age level, but we're going to build on his new language foundation, and we're going to have another fun activity that, again, is very preschool-like and could be fun. And this time we're going to work on the 3 bears. So this is another way for me to show you how I would take some of his goals and build them into an activity that is very common for a kid of age 3.5. You can use books, you can use all sorts of tools that you have on hand. Again, don't buy anything new. You could probably check the book out from the library, and the family probably has things on hand. You might have stuffed animals. You certainly have bowls and chairs. You can figure out how to make this activity into something fun. So just overall description, again, here's my overall lesson plan that we're going to break down in just a second. I have thought in my head, what can I include that's cognitive? What can I include for theory of mind? And this is an area that I just added in that I didn't have in the last one, because now he's of an age we can start thinking of things within the story, that he's starting to need to take the perspective of other people when we listen to this story. Like when things are broken, people can get pretty mad about that. And people might like different things. I might like this, but you might like that. And the concept of just right. Those are kind of higher level things, but it's okay to start introducing them now. So he needs to start thinking about that I might have my likes and you might have your likes, or your emotions and my emotions. So I'm introducing that. And language, we have lots of language within the story. We've got labels for all the characters and the items that get broken or slept on or whatever. But we also have opposites within the story. So language, now we're thinking, which also could be considered that's up in the cognitive concept. Now we have the vocabulary of those opposite words. We have speech sounds. Again, we're sticking with our earlier developing speech sounds, but now we're expecting it in phrases. And we are going to be working on pitch and duration. And I just said that I wasn't going to do that because I'm breaking it down. So let's go on to each slide. So the cognitive concepts, we've talked about that. We also have size and amount when we're talking about the mom, the dad, and the baby. And we've talked about how we add theory of mind and feelings and preferring things. Speech and language, we have specifically chosen the earlier developing sounds, and we are reading the story and we're teaching that vocabulary. And for speech, we're still sticking with auditorily bombarding him with some of the earlier developing sounds and suprasegmental contrasts. And here's our auditory goals. So pitch, high versus low. Can he identify out of a set and produce the or produce the contrast? So if I say someone's been sleeping in my bed and I use a mama voice, can he tell that it was the mama bear versus in the baby bear's voice? Can he produce that difference? And it's just fun to do it. You can act out the parts, and he's producing it and he's imitating and he's hearing it. Long versus short duration is very natural in this particular book because you can draw out the words. You say that one is too soft, too hard, just right. So he's hearing long drawn out words and short words. Can he produce that difference? Then he's able to do long versus short duration. So he's practicing that skill. Discrimination of words that differ only by vowel or consonant. You might do some minimal pairs like mama and papa, or you might do words that are more dissimilar, but he's doing it at a phrase level now. So we're bumping up that level of complexity, and we're doing some auditory memory now for some repetitive phrases. This is new, and this is a little bit harder. So after you tell the story once, and then we go back and act out the parts, he gets a chance to story retell and remember. If I say, who's been sleeping in my bed, who's been eating my porridge, who's been sitting in my chair, he might be able to repeat those as he goes through the story. He might be able to repeat one part of that phrase because he's not at the level of 3-4 words. I might say, who's been sleeping in my bed? And he might say, my bed. Or who's been eating my porridge? And he might say, my porridge. He might repeat that phrase just right if we remember that it was too hot, too cold, and then say, but this one was, and wait for him to fill in just right. That gives him a chance to practice, to remember the phrase, to practice his long versus short duration and his pitch variation. There's all sorts of ways to build his ability to remember and repeat those phrases. So we've got lots of things kind of crammed into our Cliff Bar of an activity with all those goals in mind. How can I?
Patty,
Yes.
this
Yes.
is Stacy.
Hey, Stacy.
You do have a couple questions that have come in. So
Awesome.
they're kind of related to like length of lessons or how often would you be working on this kind of activity? So how long for a typical auditory rehab activity,
Okay.
and then kind of frequency, like would you do it once or twice a week, or how would you set that up?
Okay, so those are very good questions. And I think that it probably depends on if you are a private practice person where you are going to the person's home or they're coming to you, or if you are in a school, because I would doubt that a school would give you like a 45-minute lesson time, but maybe they will. When I worked privately, I liked to go to the person's house or have them come to my office and have an hour booked off, because 15 minutes of that were with the parents to do some review of last week's things at the beginning, and then kind of this is what I want you to do at the end, and some parent teaching time. But about 45 minutes of it was lessons, and I might not spend 45 minutes on the 3 bears. I might have like some of my my bottom-up skill building time. I might have the 3 bears, and I might have like a craft activity or something within that 45 minutes. Most kids of this age are not going to last, to be honest, for 45 minutes. So I probably would spend 10 to 15 minutes on each activity. Maybe with something like the 3 bears, if we're going to do reading the book, and then that could be maybe 5-10 minutes, and then acting out the activity could be, we could extend it a little bit longer than that. But typically I would say like each portion of your task, a kid's attention span is not going to last at age 3.5 more than that. So I would try to build in those types of activities. So I don't know if you have time with parents, but if you're in a school, you may only have time to get through reading the book and doing a little bit of the task this week if you're doing like a 30-minute session, and then you're seeing them again later in the week. and doing some of your extensions to the test. You might have to break it into 2 pieces, but with a little, I liked to have at least 40 to 45 minutes of time with the kid, and preferably if they could meet twice a week, that was great for me. But a lot of times, you know, monetarily, if insurance wasn't covering anything, once a week was what I could get, if I'm just being honest. Does that answer questions? Does anyone have any comments on that, or things that they would think different?
Patty, this is Stacy again. So kind of a follow up to that was kind of, can you speak to, you know, like how audiologists might do this versus teachers of the deaf or speech therapists, you know, kind of that co-planning, co-serving shared role a little bit. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but that was a question on kind of how to make all the parts work together.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a really great idea, actually. So in my CISA, the educational audiologist does not do auditory therapy. So I'm not actually able to do most of what I'm talking about today through CISA. Although I will say, when I've had new deaf and hard of hearing teachers, or even some of my experienced teachers that have never done auditory work, I will come in and do some sample demonstration therapy sessions for them, but unfortunately that's not the way our CISA works. But if it did work that way, I probably would talk with the early childhood teacher about the themes that they're using, because usually then the speech pathologist might be working on a similar theme. And then I would use that theme to piggyback on some of my work. So I would build my auditory lesson around some of the speech sounds that the speech pathologist is working on and the vocabulary that they're using in the early childhood classroom, and maybe the story. So maybe they're also working on 3 Bears this week. That's super, because then I can use their background knowledge on that to build some vocabulary and work on some more of my auditory skills. But I would try as much as I could to collaborate with others on the team, so that I'm not doing my own thing and the speechies doing their own thing and the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing is doing their own thing. I would try to do it all together so that we can all like build the skills, and we have a better chance of getting more skills into the auditory memory and vocabulary into their auditory memory if we're all backing each other up. Of course, the speech pathologist is going to be working at it from very speech, probably archaic methods. So if they're finding things in the child's speech that could be an auditory issue, like they're not hearing the difference, then you'd want to know about that, so you could go back and do some auditory work with the child to make sure they can hear the difference between the expected and what they're actually producing sounds. So I love the idea of collaborating. When I was doing private practice, I was able to do that more, especially if the family invited me to the IEP. Then I would work with the EC teacher and the speech pathologist and the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing to work together on our activities. So I always was backing them up, but that's, you know, that's not part of what I'm doing now. Does anyone have any other ideas for how they would do it? Nothing? I hope that I've answered your questions. And after we're all done, which we're getting kind of close, I think, please we can like brainstorm some other things, because I know that private practice therapy is a lot different than doing it in the school, as far as what you're limited to for amount of time, and how much interaction you have with parents. Parents were so important for private therapy, because really it was me and the parents if they didn't already have an IEP team involved. And so we had to make sure that the parents knew how to carry over the activities into their daily life and make sure they were building on the skills. I wasn't vain enough to think that what I did in 45 minutes was making all the progress. I really feel that it was me teaching the parent how to work on those things in their everyday life that made all of the progress. And if you're working on a team, certainly you know that it's a combination effort, like it's a team effort. It's you and the speechy and the EC teacher all together, hopefully making that child move forward. So you don't want to kind of work in your own separate little world and not pay attention to what the child's doing in the other environments, I feel. So we can talk about that a little bit more during our powwow after this is done. I think that would be really helpful. So hopefully I've answered your question. If not, stop me again, Stace. I thought I heard you click on. Okay,
Oh,
so
yep, nope.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. So far the questions have been answered.
Okay.
There is a comment, so just to keep it going. Wow, phenomenal, Patty. Thank you so much. So you'll be able to read those, I think, when we're done sharing screens, but keep going. And then
okay, sounds good.
We'll do the discussion.
Okay, so we're getting pretty close. So thinking about how you can increase the complexity of the task. So again, the child seems to be getting everything that you ask them and they're getting 100% correct. Oh no, I made it too easy. No way. You can always increase the expectation for their productions, for their discrimination. If they're doing 100% at word level, then you're going to make it phrase level. You could start asking some comprehension questions, which we've not done before. That makes it more complex. You can start introducing more complex skills, some beginning time skills, maybe just first and last, or big and little. You can start asking some time concepts or size concepts, or you can start working a little bit more on identifying things by the cognitive concept that you were working on. You can ask who said a phrase that varied only by pitch. And before we weren't asking them to identify the person, you were just having them imitate. So there's ways to increase the complexity or again, decrease the complexity. So they are not getting it at all. And you're feeling like, oh boy, I really misjudged. You're gonna reduce your set size down. You can break down the auditory skill down to the word level instead of the phrase again, give him some success and then build it back up. And then just make sure that you're secure there and he's experiencing some success before you go back up to that more complex level. Ways to use that same theme again. So some extensions on the theme or working on it for a few more sessions or weeks. You can act out things. You can maybe make an activity next time where you're making porridge together and you're working on maybe a 3-step sequence. So each step is very simple, like pour the oatmeal, 1 step, and then stir the oatmeal, 1 step, or whatever, so that you're working on an activity that's related to the story, but it builds more skills. Some theory of mind ideas would be talking about foods that they like or don't like. Do they like porridge? If they say no, and they know that it's oatmeal, think about other foods they do like and other foods they don't like. And by doing those kinds of things, you're relating to the story and you're relating to the idea, the theory of mind goal that you had for understanding that different people like different things. And what is just right means what they like. And you could also have activities that work on opposites. So this is a good jumping board for starting to work on opposites. So you saw opposites within the story. Now, what other things that are opposites? And you can build vocabulary for opposites, or you can work on opposites by having a scavenger hunt. So find the opposite. I have the big ball. Can you find the little ball? So you can work on those kinds of opposites or those kinds of cognitive concepts either in your therapy, or you can give these. I used to give parents homework. So if I worked privately, I gave them some of these types of activities. I'd like you to do this for the next week, maybe 1 or 2 of them, not this whole list. And then when I talk to you at the beginning of next session, let's find out how we did. Or you could add these to your next session, or you could talk to the speech pathologist and you could both be doing some of these things. So those are just some future ideas. And that brings us to the end, actually. So I hope we're kind of running on time. We are. I have, which I made for the last session that we had in May, a wakelet, and you'll be getting, I think you're going to be getting a copy of the presentation. So you can click on this wakelet, and within the wakelet, I believe I showed you guys last time, any kind of auditory concept that we talked about, you should be I may have included a video link to it inside of my Wakelet. So I might have making auditory sandwich or how to acoustically highlight. I might have ideas for different assessments that I've seen people use. I might show you a video on how to work on onomatopoeia, or here's one on theory of mind. And then some sample lesson plans from the Med-El site. Mary Kate Terrace has some really nice lesson plans that she's been posting on their Rehab site that include the same sort of idea that you're working on cognition, language, speech, auditory. And so she has her lessons separated out, and she even she has all those skills built into each lesson for a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 kid. So if you need some ideas, like just taking a look at what she already has, maybe you won't use her exact lesson, or maybe you don't like printing out things because a 3-year-old is not interested maybe in the paper, but it might give you ideas for how to introduce some of the tasks. So some of those links are in there. If you just click on any, like here's the Rehab lesson for transport, that's one of her examples, and how my house and colors and whatnot. But there's videos within there, and I just invite you to take a look through and watch some of the videos to give you an idea of some of the concepts, or to give you reinforcement on a concept you thought you understood but were not really clear on how to get to it within an activity. That would just be my suggestion, to take a look at those. I really like the video from Cochlear on how to create an experience book. They give you beginner experience books for babies and also ones for older kids on how to work on language. I really enjoy watching those videos, and actually I've watched them over multiple times just to remind me of different ways to include it for some of the older kids. So I just invite you to look at that. And then if any of you have questions or comments, or want to get a hold of me, here's my email address. Thanks so much for joining us again, and let's open this up for discussion. Do you want me to stop sharing, Stace?
Yes, Patty, at this
Okay.
time, if you can stop sharing.
Okay.
Just to remind people, we have the poll rolling, so you can just let us know, because we know people might have to head out now. Let us know what your role is. This is kind of how we're tracking if people are teachers or audiologists, or what your primary role is. And then I have posted the Wakelet link in the chat, so people have access to that. And then we will also post the slides and everything into our Canvas group. So that is where they will be available for anyone to see.
Oh, I see a question from Tim. The tips on doing it virtually. That's a really good question, Tim. Do you mind if I go ahead and answer that?
Nope, please go ahead.
Okay.
You're right on. I was just gonna segue into his question. I
think if you have a little on the other end, I mean, obviously you're talking about if there's a family at home, that is a little more tricky, isn't it? Trying to get like the same toys, or you might end up needing to have a second copy of a book or a similar copy of a book. But I think there's ways to take like the Old MacDonald and the Three Bears, for example, probably any number of preschool things, and have either reproduce the book or get an online version of the book, or maybe not use the exact book that you would use because there is an online version of it, and have you reading the book to the child and introducing the props, and hopefully having either picture versions of the props or parents having similar ones at home. So there's gonna be a little more organization on your part ahead of time, like, Mom, Dad, could you have XYZ handy, or let me know what you do or don't have. And again, that's gonna make you have to be kind of like fly by the seat of your pants a little bit, because you're gonna have to pull from what you have and use the materials that you have rather than what you normally have in front of you. That's true. You guys are in for a challenge on this oncoming school year. So also I've seen not to, because I have no association with Med-El, I state that, like nothing, but I did note that during the time that we were off of school, those lesson plans that Mary Kay was posting before, there was an online, a virtual version of it. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. So she had taken anything that you normally would have printed out, she had put it into like a slide format. And so the parents could have that to show the same exact pictures as she was using while you worked on your lesson plan. So maybe for older kids, if that type of thing works well, like school age kids. I generally, when I was working with little kids, I have found that hands-on toys and like real things and Play-Doh and things that they can touch and feel and hold generally hold their attention a little longer than a video game or things on a screen. So if there's ways to figure out what parents have and what you have, so you can maybe have duplications of the toys or the items that you're using, or something, even if they're not identical, similar at home and I think that would be good to at least have part of your session using real items rather than all like online games. I know for some of the older kids, some of our teachers in CISA 2 were using Hear Builder for some of the auditory skills. But if we're looking at littles and we're looking at ways to pack in the most into your auditory lesson, I still really feel like some hands-on things and real books and real items really engage more of all of the language and the speech and the cognition together than auditory drill work on one skill area. I hope that gives you some ideas, probably doesn't resolve it for you. And actually that's really a great topic for all of you guys to discuss together, how to turn these things for littles into activities for online. I'm seeing in the chat now that my Wakelet isn't opening. So Stace, if you can stand after we're done here and help me with that. I thought that I had it public. So if it's not public, I'll just need just a couple tips to make it so that others can use it. I thought I had done that, but I do want you guys to have the ability to look in it. So I will get that figured out. Does anyone else have a question or something they want to talk about? And come on, I know a lot of you guys are already working with kids. Do you have any things that you've done with those two themes that you can share with the group, like ways that you've worked on different skills or ways you've extended the lesson for like Three Bears or Old MacDonald that you could share? Nobody. It's crickets out there, Space.
And that's okay, Patty. I think people are truly digesting all of the things that you have shared. And yes, we will figure out the link worked earlier and now it didn't work. So love technology, how
it's that same with that integrated scales. I've been using that same link for, I can't tell you, like years, and all of a sudden the integrated scales of development, it brings me up to that page, or it says no longer available, but I can still get to the page and open it. So we're gonna have to figure out that. It is a nice and free tool. So
yes, so we will, this is Stacy, we'll definitely recheck all of those and make sure that you guys have them. So if people don't have questions, maybe we could shift it a little bit and people could go with a live mic so people can hear you instead, so we will have people unmute, but maybe people could just share like their favorite auditory activity or something that they have used with families or kids that they've found really helpful. Maybe we can just learn a little bit from each other.
Hey, Stacy, this is Heidi. I have a question that came in just because I was doing a little bit of side private chats. And so instead of replying to everyone, it just came into me. So we have a teacher who has a child who's working with a private AV therapist, and the teacher's been trying to collaborate with that AV therapist, but it just isn't successful. any like sort of tips on how a teacher can sort of initiate or engage a private therapy session, how to consult with that professional?
Well, it sounds like that person's trying to be very territorial about that child, probably because they're worried that you guys have so much overlap. I feel that that's too bad. That's a missed opportunity for that person, and for you and for that child, really, to have some overlap in some of the opportunities to build those skills and to reinforce those skills. So there's no way you can force a private person to work with you, obviously. All you can do is reach out and ask and say, hey, I would like to work on some skills together, or I'd like to extend some skills, or is there anything that you're doing that I can reinforce in my activities? Just so they know you're not trying to encroach on their business. You just literally want to build and extend that child's knowledge on language. And then, unless that person and you are also invited to a meeting together, like an IEP meeting where you share what you're working on, I don't know that there's any way for you to force them to work collaboratively with you. Unfortunately, I wish that everyone would be looking for what is best for the child. But unfortunately, I have also found that to sometimes be the case.
And so this is Heidi again. I'm going to, just for myself, I'm going to add two sort of follow-up questions to that. So one of them is, could the issue be at all that in order for the private therapist to consult with like teachers, for example, that becomes payable hours? And is there some sort of like challenge with that, depending, like if that AV therapist is in a private clinic, does that consult with the teacher become payable hours? And then the other question that I would have with that is there any way to mess it up if people are sort of, if people are both providing sort of auditory rehab or auditory verbal therapy, for example, and they're not on the same page? And so somebody's working on one skill in one area and somebody else is independently working on another skill in another area. Is there any way that it would sort of delay or make that student actually have more challenges auditorily?
Are you meaning like going from a different communication approach, Heidi, or you're just working on two different skills?
Yeah, so like your auditory verbal therapist or an AUDS or whatever, who maybe have way more training in the area of auditory rehab. And then you have the teachers for the deaf or speech and language pathologist who is working on just sort of, they kind of know how to do it and they have their targets. But they're not doing it sort of in that same rudimentary, very structured way that like an ed-aud or an AV therapist might. Can it actually, I don't know if I want to use the word confusion, but can it cause anything where it would disrupt that auditory like progression? And maybe just my ignorance on this whole topic is coming out.
Well, I think, no, I don't think so, because I think that we do have some, again, territorial folks in some visuals, do not add visual, you know what I'm saying? And I think maybe you're coming from having heard those types of things. So, and there are different adhering philosophies, I could say. When I did therapy, I was doing auditory therapy, but I was not working from the mindset of strictly auditory verbal therapy. I was giving the child to an opportunity to learn auditory skills, but I was not high skills for my, or visual cues for my face. So it tell you ability to hone in on an audition. Sometimes I've heard that, or you're going to decrease their progress in developing those auditory skills if you give them too many visual things. But and this is just my personal opinion. So if you're in the same developmental sequence, and you should be, because there's only one, and speech and hearing and cognition. You're all working at the appropriate level. No one's going to mess anyone else up. You're all going to be building skills. Now, you might be building different skills. Say the auditory verbal therapist doesn't want you to be showing your mouth. Well, that's fine. She can be doing that and working on the auditory skills, and you might be working more realistic what happens in the classroom in reality every day when they're talking with their friends skills by allowing the child to see your face. And those two things should build. I think there is a time for working strictly on auditory and so they can hear the difference. Like when we talk about the auditory sandwich, give it to them auditorily, give them some auditory visual, give it back to them auditorily so they can hear the difference without seeing those cues. But I don't think you can mess a kid up by working on it in a different way. If anything, you're giving them more information and building that concept by giving them a different viewpoint or a different way to look on it. Because again, there's only one normal development, and normal hearing kids and hard of hearing kids all go through the same phases and stages. I think I've hit on what probably has been told to you, Heidi, but I don't think that you don't understand the concepts. I think that maybe you're being critiqued for something that I don't think is that big of a deal. Maybe. That's just my opinion, mind you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Anyone else?
And Patty, this is Stacy. I mean,
Yeah.
I will second that. I mean, it's always a tricky place to have a professional difference of opinion. And, you know, we've all had those conversations, or hopefully we're strong enough to say, it's okay if we disagree. It's okay. You know, but, you know, encourage everybody to have those challenging conversations, because it's rare that we have completely different outcomes or goals for the students that we work with. And so sometimes we just need to have the conversations to, even as professionals, work within our own strengths, or talk about, like, why do you approach it that way, or whatever. And really it's a better outcome for the students, because they might be getting it two ways. So again, it's reinforcing, or again, you know, going at it from a different modality or a little bit different angle, and it might just click for that student. So I think there's value in having those conversations and just asking the person, like, hey, can we connect? You know, we're both in this for this student. And, you know, when you keep the kids in mind, it makes it all of it a whole lot easier to have those conversations.
I think that's a really good point. You may differ on that opinion, and you may differ on how to work on that skill, but if we're all working in the same developmental sequence, and you can agree that maybe they're going to work on it a little different way, hearing why they're working on it from that way, you may still not decide to do it that way, but understanding that that's where they're getting their reinforcement. So for me personally, if I heard, for example, again, that they were saying, well, I will not give them, I'm covering my mouth when I do it, that's great, because now I know that they're getting all of the auditory only work that they need on that targeted skill. So I don't feel like I have to work on it that way, because they're getting a lot from that person, but we're still working on that same cognitive concept and those same vocabulary words and the same speech sound auditory bombardment. That's awesome. So we're still on the same page. But if you don't have that conversation, you might be like pedaling too hard. Like if she's working on a concept that you were going to work on in 2 months right now, and you're working on something that she's already covered, wouldn't it have been better for the child had you known what each of you were going to work on, so you could work on it together and kind of reinforce each other? It's not that you're going to mess up the child by doing it in 2 different time frames, but it could be even better if you did it at the same time frame and kind of built on each other. That's what I'm thinking.
And this is Heidi Hollenberger again. I was going to also go back to like Tim's question about virtually, because as I was sitting here thinking, we have a couple of school districts, and I only know the ones that specifically have students who are deafblind, who are getting virtual therapy through the Moog Center. So they are doing it obviously virtually because they're in Missouri and we're here. The difference is that it still is mostly up until COVID. I don't know, since COVID, it was still happening in the school, you know, so that there was a support from a teacher for the blind or a teacher for the deaf. So I wonder if I reach out to Betsy Moog even and see if they have any, or look at their website to see if they have any like tips that they're sharing about providing virtual auditory rehab.
That's a great idea. That's a really great idea. If they have, maybe they have some information on that to share with us, because Moog, I don't know what the age group is for Moog. I would guess, like venture to guess.
Like the one that they were serving for the student that I specifically am mentally referencing. He started when he was 4, and he is now 7, I believe.
Okay. I want to say it's been a long time since I've been there, but I did some training at CID and at St. Joseph's when they only went up to like 5th grade, I want to say, and then they mainstreamed after that. But if they have some ideas that could help our teachers and anyone that's doing some auditory work in the schools, that would be great information to share, since they'd be really experienced at it. They've been doing it for some time. So we're kind of trying to reinvent a wheel that maybe already is invented and get some clues from them. Good idea.
I will reach out. I'll look that up, and then I will share it with wherever the resource section is that we have that's related to your topic today.
Cool. Thanks, Heidi. Anyone else? Anyone else have some experience with doing some virtual therapy with some littles, like some early childhood through kindergarten, 1st grade, that they've found to be helpful? What have you learned? What mistakes have you made so far? Since I did not do this during COVID.
Yeah, hi, this is Betsy from Kenosha. I've been trying to do virtual visits, you know, since the shutdown with birth to 3. And it's been inconsistent. The best thing is, as you already mentioned, to try to get a hold of the parents before the session, ask them to gather all these different materials, including maybe favorite toys, things like that. And it works well with the language and with the auditory training. If I had started it before the shutdown, you know, because the parents had seen us in action, they kind of knew what the procedure was and what to do. But for newly identified kids or kids just starting to service, it's been tougher because the parents haven't seen it in person. You know, I'll try to role play, or I've taped a few little mini sessions. You know, this is how you would do it with a puzzle or with a bucket, and shared that with them, but they seemed overwhelmed. And it's hard for them, especially if they have other kids, you know, to find a quiet place in their house to do it. But we're just plugging through the best we can.
Thanks for sharing that, Betsy. I have, not that I was doing most of the auditory therapy, but I do have a student that he had lost his hearing. Like, it was one of those ones where one day he was hearing and one day, boom, gone from some kind of a viral. It was not meningitis, but we just identified him last year, and he was implanted, I believe, in February, and then boom, we're gone in March. And so I was kind of collaborating with the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, and we did find some of the videos that I posted in the Wakelet. What we would do is we would have an online Zoom with the parent and explain what the concept was that we wanted her to work on, and give her a link to the video to watch and suggest some toys to use to work on that one concept. So we tried to make it like not too many things to learn all at one time, just one thing. So if we want her to work on the task of like showing a response when you hear a sound, that was what she was going to do for this week, like just waiting to make a conditioned response. I showed her a video, had her practice that. Then the next week we introduced a different skill and we talked about it. We did some examples where we told her ahead of time what to have in front of her, and we had to make our sessions kind of shorter to do the demonstration, because it really wasn't working great with us over the video to do it with him and mom, but it was great just to show her with the toys what we were doing, and then explain it to her, and then have her watch the video and practice it. And then we came back the next week or the next session. I think we were working with him twice a week. He was 3. Then she would tell us how he did. And it seemed like she was actually having more success doing the activity with him at home than we actually had online. I don't know if that's your experience too, but that was one example that I had. And so I totally understand. I didn't have that rapport with him yet. Parents hadn't watched us do anything, because literally he just had the implants turned on like 2 weeks before we closed school. So it was rough. It was really rough. And you're doing that, what I just explained, probably times 15, 20 kids. So hats off.
Exactly what you said, to just keep it really short. I mean, I'm working just on ling sounds, or, like you said, identifying 2 or 3 words just to get them used to what the concept of listening is. So yeah, that's the most successful. And I like your idea of just letting them practice it at home, because if they're not familiar, even just looking at the computer screen, I mean, it just doesn't work well. They're 1.5 and looking at me and being enthralled and trying to touch it. And yeah, so just showing the parents, and hopefully, they grasp enough to continue practicing at home is what's working best right now.
Yeah, I mean, and also you're dependent, like you're at the mercy of if the parents are going to do it, right? I mean, I think some of our teachers had trouble just getting some of the parents to show up for their Zoom meetings or their Hangouts or whatever they were using. But if you do have a parent that's really thirsty for that information, it sounds like, some of your parents were just using that time more as parent teaching time than therapy time, especially with their really littles, might, I think, be more beneficial than trying to force through a lesson where the kid's not engaged with the screen. I mean, like I said, for my therapy, I was never vain enough to think that I was the one that made the difference when I was doing private therapy, because I knew I was here 1 day a week for many of those kids, and they're 2, some of them are 1, 2, or 3. There was no way that 45 minutes helped them make the gains that I saw in that next week session. No way. It was what the parents did after I left. And
totally.
Yeah.
And that's the statewide philosophy also, is parent coaching. It's not, I kind of have to balance and know what to push for, within birth to 3, when I talk about auditory training, because the philosophy is parents as the teachers and not us. So
hopefully we'll get the Wakelet on. I think for me, just finding a video of the skill I was trying to teach was the frustrating part. So when I originally started making that Wakelet, not for this talk, but it was for that kid. Honestly, like I started like, oh God, I found a video on how to do this skill. I'll throw it into the Wakelet. And I started, as I added it, I was like, wow, I'm building up this nice little collection of foundational skills. So then I would share, each week I would share one, teach it how to do it, and then send her off. So maybe that will be helpful for the really littles. I don't know about your school age kids. I mean, I would love to hear what some of you folks did for virtual that you thought was successful, or things that you think just bombed, what to avoid as we go into this next school year.
So this is Heidi Hollenberger. You guys triggered sort of a thought for me. We've been offering story time for children really birth to 6 as part of our virtual offerings. And I wasn't there, but they shared a story that our Robin Barnes is the teacher that leads the story time. And so she had a book and she was going to share it with the families and the babies. And the one child knew that he had a book just like it, but he couldn't find his. And so he spent a lot of time trying to convince Robin that she came somehow and stole his book. So so they spent a lot of time trying to assure him that they did not steal his materials just because that he couldn't find his book. So I would be curious, like at some point in time when you guys are doing this virtually, if that may happen when you have an item that's the same. I would think that sometimes you can get really off task, but everything can become an auditory opportunity, I'm sure, and a language developing opportunity.
That's funny. I noticed that some of our teachers, again, most of the time it was not me doing the therapy, but a lot of the teachers were finding these great online books, and they may not have had the exact copy of the book at home, so they just used the one that was online. So the parent could watch the video of the book being read as an extension to the task, or before they did their therapy session. And then when the teacher went on to work with the child and the parent, they had already read the book maybe, and then they could talk about the book or read it again. So they had a paper copy of the book, and then they talked about the concepts in the book. So it was a way to kind of have the parent do a little bit of extension at home or work on the concepts. And there's a lot more books online being read out loud than I thought I dreamed possible. There's a lot of books out there. Like one of my favorites is like The Very Hungry Caterpillar. There's so many things. I love all the Eric Carle. There's so many series that I love, but the Eric Carle series, there's a lot of them that are recorded, and then it's pretty easy to find play foods to go along with that, to work on some of the time sequence and the numbers and whatever concepts you're working on in that book. But a lot of the books that you might think to teach a skill or an auditory skill or a cognitive concept are recorded online. So it would be a great tool to use. And I think a lot of our teachers are probably already doing that. At least some of the ones I work with did for their families.
And Patty, this is Stacy. So, just a reminder for folks too, is we have a lot of kids who are using both ASL and listening and spoken language. So in that same vein of getting books that are read, there are also lots and lots of ASL books online. And so again, like just, encouraging families, or like, here, you can be doing both. Here's a link for this story done 2 different ways. What wonderful exposure. So again, encourage folks to look for the resources, because, we've realized through our work that like, oh, we were going to recreate all these things. And in our searching, we found there's all kinds of stuff that we can already use. So maybe that kind of, it's the shift is to give parents things ahead of time, or you know what I mean, like find those resources ahead of time, so that when you do come together, then you can have some of those parent learning opportunities, because they need to be supported too.
I agree. No, that's a good point, Stacy. Oh, go ahead. Someone else had a comment.
This is Christine. I worked with some 4- and 5-year-olds virtually over the spring, and I always did in my session, we would do some listening skills. I used Google Slides, and I would animate the pictures in, so they would listen, and then once if they were successful, or once we did the listening, and then I would animate the picture in, and they would get very excited when the picture came in and they were right. So I did use Google Slides quite a lot during my listening sessions, but I also did always end my sessions with a story. And I found that not just listening to a story being read by a person standing there, they have the animated stories. So if you can find the animated stories, those really kept the attention of the younger kids really well.
Good idea. That's a really good idea. And, again, hats off to you guys, because during the time that schools were closed, the libraries were also closed a lot too. So finding some of these things online had to have been like crucial. Even you didn't have the opportunity to go get a book that you didn't already have in your house. Again, I'm a hoarder when it comes to books, so I probably have most of my favorite books from my children who are now college age. But a lot of people don't. So having that online stuff is wonderful. Online books being read. And I like the idea of the Google Slides with the animations in it. I think that does keep it a little more interesting.
So anyone else have some ideas to share that worked well for you? Okay, well, I think, we are going to wrap up our topic for today. So thank you very much, Patty, for all of the information. We will post the slides and we will work on getting the permission for the Wakelet public so you guys can access those many, many resources. And again, like if you come across good resources, feel free to like link them or add them in the Canvas area so other folks can see them. We will have 2 more professional development topics this summer yet. So the next one in 2 weeks, our very own Mary Fruits and Rhonda Last, who's the school psychologist at WSD, will be taking us through the realm of autism and for kids with, hearing loss and autism and some other
Nice.
topics related to that. And then in 4 weeks, August 18th, we will have Elizabeth Seeliger here from Wisconsin Sound Beginnings. They have a lot of new and exciting things coming up. So Elizabeth will be sharing the updates on new staff and new programs and all those kinds of things that they're doing. And then our team is already working on filling up the school year. For learning opportunities and things. There will be an interpreter series. We are working on some specific dates. October 1st, we will be doing an auditory processing all-day virtual training with Jean Ann Ferry from Illinois. It is free. We have sent the info out, so if you're interested, please register as we have a limit of 100 people to do that virtually. Heidi and I have been working on some co-plan, co-serve opportunities, which will kind of be like a team ongoing training through the school year and everything else for our students, our parents, all those kinds of things. So make sure, you're checking into Canvas or looking at the events schedule on the Outreach WESP calendar of events. And so again, ideas for topics, please keep them coming to us. And we know the next couple weeks are gonna be a little stressful because we're starting to see, we're at the top of the iceberg again to see all of the changes coming because everybody's done all this planning for possibly in person. And now we're starting to see some school districts have decided to just go virtual. But please know that Outreach is here. We're happy to take your ideas and share them and get you guys connected. So have a great couple weeks and we'll see you again on August 4th.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.